Vamos a dar inicio con nuestra siguiente conferencia. Es para mí un placer presentarles a quien es presidente de BEworks Research Institute. Él es ni más ni menos que David Lewis, con el tema de economía del comportamiento y el crédito en la nueva normalidad. Así que démosle un aplauso muy fuerte a David Lewis. David, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I apologize for not being able to address you in Spanish. In the late 90s, I worked for Scotiabank and was in Mexico and Latin America and South America a fair amount. At the time, I could speak halting Spanish. Now, of course, I haven't used it, and so I've lost it. But it's nice to be back in Mexico City. The weather here is beautiful. When I used to work at Scotiabank, I many times would go to the Caribbean. I'd go to Barbados or Jamaica, and my friends would all think I was hanging out on a beach under a palm tree. The reality is I really don't like warm weather. I'm more of a cold weather person. But the weather outside today is absolutely beautiful. You couldn't ask for better weather. So pleased to be here to see this weather. BEworks Research Institute, we're part of BEworks, which is a behavioral economics consulting firm. We do behavioral economics consulting. And what that is really looking at the insights of behavioral economics to understand behavior. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. In an hour, I can't do more than just give you a bit of an introduction and give you some interesting ideas and insights and hopefully get you interested in the topic, and you can then explore further on your own. What we'll talk about today is we were thinking that the world has changed somewhat, certainly over the last 5 years, but certainly as well with COVID, many things happened that have changed the world as well. And we sat and thought about it and said, what's different about the world today than previously? And so we started calling it the new normal, because this is the new normal. And what we tried to do is apply a behavioral economics lens, and I'll get more into what that means. We thought more about the insights of behavioral economics and how that can help us explain behavior and explain what people are doing today that may be different than what they did. And then I'll talk a little bit about the implications for both financial institutions, consumers, policymakers, and I will try to move not so fast that it makes it difficult for the translators to translate, but I'll try and leave enough time at the end so that we can have questions and you can ask me things that may have come up that you've thought about. So many of the effects and changes of COVID are obvious. As I look around the room, I see people sitting in face masks and they're spread apart. That's obvious. But there's also many things that have changed that are less obvious. And we're going to talk about some of those things. This is data from Canada. 67% of Americans, well, it's Canada and the US, 67% of Americans are not financially healthy. And if you look at research from the Bank of Canada, a third of Canadians are unemployed or underemployed. And certainly COVID has caused a lot of that. And what has happened is something called the K-shaped recovery, where some segments of the population are doing quite well, but other segments of the population are still struggling. And you know, the World Economic Outlook by the IMF called it divergent recoveries. You have some countries that are recovering more quickly than others, and you have some segments that are recovering more quickly than others. And as a result, we do have many people turning to credit. Oh, sorry, went too fast on that one. And it's similar in Mexico. 58% of adults in Mexico can't cover expenses with their actual income. And 6 out of 10 Mexicans are informal workers. And so again, we see all across the world, whether it's Mexico, other countries in Latin America, we see these K-shaped recoveries. And there are implications for financial institutions. To better understand it, we have to think about some of the assumptions of economics. And, you know, even 20, 30 years ago, people were criticizing economists saying, well, how can your theory be based on assumptions which are clearly wrong? They don't really describe reality. And at the time, the economists said, okay, well, that's neoclassical, rational choice theory. Okay, maybe it doesn't perfectly explain reality, so we're going to develop something new called, new classical economics. And there they said that individuals themselves may make decisions that really aren't rational, but as a society as a whole, the irrational decisions cancel out, and so overall, then it doesn't matter that the assumptions are wrong. And Milton Friedman, using a philosophy, scientific instrumentalism, said it doesn't even matter if the theory makes sense as long as the predictions are true and the theory is useful. And if you can make predictions from the theory that are useful, then ignore the fact that the assumptions seem flawed or seem unrealistic. Well, there's a problem with that, because the predictions of new classical economics also don't really predict how people behave. And all you have to do is look at the way people make decisions, and you can say, well, if the assumptions are bad and the predictions are bad, we need a new theory. And no theory is ever perfect. You have some theories that do a better job of explaining reality than others. And what behavioral economics really tries to do is it says, we're not rational. We're not computers. We're not Spock when we make decisions. We try to be, but many times we're not. And so what we are is boundedly rational. We have cognitive limitations, we have psychological influences, we have cultural influences, we have emotional influences. We try our best to make rational decisions, but many times we don't. And what behavioral economics is an attempt to understand why it is that sometimes we do things that aren't in our best interest. How many of you have ever joined a gym? And you said, okay, I've joined the gym now and I'm going to exercise and I'm going to get in good shape and I'm going to eat better and I'm going to stop eating dessert. And how many of you did that all the time? We try, but sometimes we fail. And so behavioral economics would look at that and say, why is it that someone would pay money to go to a gym and then not go? It's costing you money. And there's theories and there's explanations. And so the rational economists would say no one would pay money to a gym and not go. That just doesn't make sense. The behavioral economist says many people do that. Let's understand why. And then further, we would say, let's help these people go to the gym more often because they want to, but because of psychological or emotional, cultural factors, they don't always do what's best for them. And so that's a simple example where we know we should, but many times we don't do what's best for us. And so how can we change that, right? So gyms, for example, realize that if they want people to go better, turn it into a habit, because habits help people follow through on behavior. And gamification's another example. So my partner has an Apple Watch, and she's always trying to close her circles. And she gets to the end of the night and says, oh, I have one circle that's almost closed. And I'll be sitting reading my book quietly, and she'll be running down to the basement, then upstairs, then down to the basement, then upstairs. And I go, what are you doing? And she's going, shut up, I'm closing my circle. Well, it works, right? It sounds silly, but it works. And so that's a behavioral economics insight that says, if you turn it into a game, if you make it into a habit, then people will actually follow through on the behavior. That's an insight of behavioral economics. The traditional economics view would be, why would you not exercise? It's good for you. And so really we're going to talk today about financial decisions and how many times we do similar things. We try to make good decisions, we try to do the right thing, but we all know that we fail. And behavioral economics tries to understand, why do we fail? And then how can we prevent people from failing so that they can do what they really want to do? We're going to look at 5 factors that we thought were interesting in COVID. One is scarcity mindset, and I'll get into these a little later. We're going to look at buy now, pay later. We're going to look at personal finance apps. We're going to look at the use of intangible payments. And we're going to look at real estate prices. Let's start with scarcity mindset. So scarcity mindset is a description of changes in the way we think and the way we behave brought on by scarcity. And it's interesting where this came up was, it was a study of sugarcane farmers in Southeast Asia. And sugarcane farmers are unfortunate because they are able to harvest their sugarcane once a year, and yet they need the money from that to last them for the whole year. And they noticed that these people make really good decisions when they have a lot of money, but as their money runs down, they start to make bad decisions. And so they studied it. And they found that people in a scarcity mindset, whether it's a scarcity of social interaction, like many of us felt during COVID, a scarcity of financial resources, which people in precarious employment or people with limited employment would have, this scarcity causes changes. It causes short-term thinking. We don't think about the long term. It causes selfishness. We care less about others and care more about ourselves and say, you know, I got to look after myself here. We're less pro-social. And we also tend, they actually did studies on these people, and they were simple studies of, you know, ability to memorize words. And people in scarcity had a lesser ability to memorize words than people who weren't in scarcity, which shouldn't make sense. It's the same brain, right? But under scarcity, people's cognitive abilities decline. And you can actually see that as well. They did an experiment where they had people playing a game. It was a game where you could borrow, basically you had a limited time to complete a task. And if you were running low on time, you could borrow time so that you could complete the task. But if you borrowed time, then that gave you less time for the next round. And people who weren't in scarcity, who felt they had plenty of time, made much better decisions with whether to borrow or not. And people who were in scarcity made increasingly bad decisions and borrowed from future rounds of the game, and as a result, they usually lost. And so you can see the parallels to financial decision-making from scarcity mindset. What it causes is people are hungrier for credit. You know, they're worried about their resources and they tend to want to borrow credit, and they neglect future concerns. They start to think, I'm worried about now and today, I'm less worried about next month, next year. They're less thoughtful and deliberative in their decision making. They tend to prioritize personal gains over pro-social gains. And they also experience something called cognitive tunneling. And imagine a tunnel where instead of viewing all of the possibilities, they start to narrow just on one narrow solution. And that's been noticed in credit counseling, where there's plenty of ways to help these people, but they're no longer interested in that. They start to focus very narrowly on what do I have today and what can I do today. So the implications there are that with scarcity mindset, again, precarious employment, lack of social interaction, anytime we're feeling scarcity, there's more of a likelihood that we're going to take on debt. And credit-based spending, right? I don't care if I can't pay off my credit card at the end of the month. I just want to go out and have fun tonight. I don't care if I'm not saving enough for my retirement. I'm going on a cruise. I don't care anymore. And they tend to think less about solutions and help. And the implications really are that this causes worsening financial health, and we're seeing that now. And unfortunately, we know financial well-being is actually really, really important. Financial well-being matters more than the combined effects of relationship satisfaction, job satisfaction, and physical health combined. Imagine that. Poor financial health or well-being has a very, very serious impact on people. And, you know, for those of us looking to help society and help people, we have to realize that, you know, this K-shaped recovery, this divergent recovery, this scarcity mindset that's happening is very serious. And as well, what this means is a lot of the predictive models with respect to credit repayment are no longer as effective as they used to be. We can see that mathematically they're breaking down and they aren't working as well. And part of the reason is that many of those models were developed and attuned during a different environment, a different economic environment, a different social environment, and many things have changed. So what do? Ruthlessly simplify everything. You know, there's an example. We were helping a very large utility that was trying to help people who couldn't afford to pay their utility bills. They had over $100 million to help these people. And what they were going to do is to go to these segments of the population who were spending a large proportion of their income on their electricity bill, and they said, We will give you free LED lights. We will replace your energy inefficient appliances. And this is Canada. We'll give you weather stripping to help seal your windows. We'll give you insulation. And if you are in a certain socioeconomic group, we'll give it to you for free. And the surprising thing is, after running this program for a couple of years, they came to us and they said, we have like so much money left, we can't understand. We're trying to give away money and people aren't taking it. What do we do? And it sounds funny, right? You can't even give away the money. But think of scarcity mindset. These people aren't thinking about their utility bill over the course of a year. They're thinking, how do I feed my kids tonight? How do I keep the lights on? How do I keep the heat on? And this utility had created a program that was beautiful but complicated. And because of scarcity mindset, these people said, yeah, I'll read that. And they put it on the counter and it then very quickly became buried under another pile of bills. And the reason was it was too complicated. You have to ruthlessly simplify. You have to realize people are in a cognitive state where they can't deal with complexity. So if you're trying to help people, make it simple. And then if you think it's simple, simplify it again. And if you think it's as simple as it can be, it still isn't. Simplify it more. And you also have to get rid of hassle costs, because people say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but it's a hassle and I got a lot of other things to worry about and I'll look at that on the weekend. And then they never do. And again, it's completely irrational, because the economists would say, well, why would people turn down free money? That's stupid. Of course they're going to do it. Well, that's not how they behave, and we know why. And you also have to think about tangible benefits that go beyond monetary incentives. So don't say, I'm going to replace your LEDs and I'm going to help give you weather stripping and insulation. Say, you're going to be able to keep your lights on. You're going to be able to turn your heat up. Things that really, really matter and is much more obvious than talking about weather stripping and energy efficient lighting. Let's think about buy now, pay later. Again, think of scarcity mindset. Think of the temptation of borrowing for immediate pleasure. And the easier you make that, the more likely people are going to do that, right? And they've made it seamless. The retailers have been really, really good at this. It's so easy. You go into the store, and it's very, very easy to just buy that new video game or that new pair of shoes or whatever it is that's tempting. It's so easy with buy now, pay later. And as well, mental accounting is something where we divide things into buckets. So we have a tendency to think about, well, this is my play money, this is my saving money, this is my money for paying bills, right? We have this mental accounting. Money is fungible. It doesn't matter what bucket you put into it. And I can remember when I started in banking in, I won't say what year, but this little old lady used to come in. She was a lovely little old lady, and I was a trainee, so I started as a teller, and she had like 10 different passbooks. And I said, why do you have so many passbooks? You know, if you put it all into one passbook, you have a higher balance, so you get a higher interest. And she looked at me like, you know, I wasn't very smart and said, well, this is for paying my utilities, this is for paying my mortgage, this one is for my groceries, this one is for my car, and I keep them separate so that I know where everything is. Well, for her that worked. That's called mental accounting. It can actually work in the case of buy now, pay later. Because if you actually separate your, let's say we go out and we buy something we really know we shouldn't, rather than it getting merged into the credit card and getting lost, it sticks out there. And it says, yeah, I remember I bought that video game and I really shouldn't have and I really should pay it off. So this can be used as an advantage with clients, with customers who are borrowing. Unfortunately, people tend to be overly optimistic when they make those purchases. They say, okay, I'm buying this video game, I really shouldn't, I really can't afford it, but it's a pleasure, I feel guilty about it, but I'm going to spend less next month and I'm going to pay it off. And yet when you see what they do, they don't. Because there's always unexpected payments. People do a pretty good job of calculating their recurring expenses. You know, my rent and my utilities and my groceries and all of that is about this, and I got this much left over, so I'm going to use that to pay it off. The problem is there's always unexpected. Something comes up, right? Your kid comes to you and says, I need a new pair of shoes. Suddenly you can't pay it off. And unfortunately, that tends to happen. We're not really good. We're not computers. We can't do cash flow forecasts. It's just not the way we think. So invariably, people with the best of intentions use buy now, pay later, and yet they fail to actually repay it. And unfortunately, for a lot of consumers, they don't have a credit card. And so buy now, pay later, which is really, really easy, is the only way they have to buy these guilty pleasures, which we all need so much now in this post-COVID world. And as I said, those scheduled repayments are good. It forces you, right? I have to make this payment, I have to make this payment, so I'm going to make it. So in theory, that should work. In practice, we know that many, in fact, the majority of people don't stick to those scheduled repayments. And this winds up being another loan. And this winds up being expensive. And particularly at the lower end of the spectrum, we find people are taking on too much debt. And a lot of this debt isn't even on traditional credit bureaus. So even the lenders and the banks aren't even aware that many of these consumers are taking on more debt. And now we start to understand why a lot of the credit scoring models don't have as much predictability as they used to. However, once we're aware of the fact that this happens, and once we understand scarcity mindset, then it indicates that we should start to incorporate those into the credit scoring. We should be more anticipating the fact that a lot of consumers are going to be doing things that really aren't in their best interest. So one thing we can help them is when people are trying to budget, tell them, don't just think about what you spent last month. Think about what you spent last month, and think about that unexpected event that happened last month, and assume it's going to happen again this month, right? Last month it was your kids needed new running shoes. Well, last month I had a dog that got an infected toe. We were out hiking and suddenly I had this huge vet bill, right? You have to anticipate these things will happen. And we can help lenders, or as policymakers, we can help borrowers by encouraging them to anticipate those unexpected expenses when they're doing their anticipation of their ability to pay off credit. Let's think about personal finance apps. So a lot of people said, oh, personal finance apps are going to solve all this. Instead of us having to think about it mentally, we'll have these wonderful apps on our computers or on our iPhones or on our cell phones, and these apps are going to help us keep track of our budget. They're going to help us make better decisions. Think of it as like augmented reality for finances. And there's something for everything now. You have online banking, fraud prevention, saving, borrowing, credit score, right? Help build your credit score. And that's great. That sounds great. Insurance, financial planning. The problem is that they tend to be segregated, right? So they're convenient. They let consumers compare offers. They're good record keeping. It gives real-time support for planning. All those things are great. The problem is that they're not holistic. They tend to look at things in isolation. As well, many people don't have access to that technology. Large segments of the population, there's elderly who aren't as tech savvy, and there's also people that for various reasons don't have a cell phone or don't have a computer. And there's also the blind spot caused by scarcity mindset, where people are overly optimistic in their ability to alter their future saving and spending. And then compartmentalized and biased attention. People will focus on their credit cards and forget that they have money sitting in a savings account earning zero. And the funny thing as well about mental accounting, you'd think the rational decision is, okay, why do I have $200 sitting in a savings account and a $200 balance on my credit card where I'm paying X%? I should just pay it off. Well, that makes people uneasy. And if you ask them why, they say, well, I like having emergency funds available just in case. Well, okay, but you've got your credit card. If you really do have an emergency, you got your credit card. But they go, no, I like it this way. Just leave me alone. Right? My mother does this. Right? She wants to keep a whole pile of money in her checking account. She's 87. She's a lovely old lady. We have a hard time getting her to come out and meet us for lunch because she goes, oh, you go ahead. I'll stay home. I'm fine. But she seems to think she needs money around in case she has to buy a car or go on a trip. She's not buying a car or going on a trip, but it makes her feel good. And so I literally had to put money into an account that she could see every day online, that she could see that her money was there. And I would tell her, you're not earning anything on that. I can invest it, right? I can buy you a safe bank stock with a dividend of 5%. And she's like, yeah, but I like to know I can get at it. And I say, well, I can sell a stock and it settles in 2 days. And if you really need the money faster than 2 days, I'll lend it to you. No, I just keep it this way, please. I like it this way. People do that. There's also something called the licensing effect, which is kind of a funny one. It also explains why people join a gym and don't go. It also explains why people sign up for diets and don't follow them. It also explains why people will go to the gym, come home, and eat ice cream. Because this licensing, they say, and by the way, this has been applied to many, many different areas. This one sounds funny, but if people make a donation to charity, they're less honest later when you ask them embarrassing questions. They'll lie. And it's licensed. They go, well, I did this good thing I gave to charity, so I'll just tell this little fib. Well, I joined the gym, so that's good. I'll go next week, right? Well, I got this personal finance app. I haven't actually stopped spending as much or started savings more, but I do have the app now, so at least I'm making progress. But that's not progress. That's called the licensing effect. And so, as well, there tend to be defaults, right? You make the minimum payment, and people go, oh, no, I'm paying my credit card. I made the minimum payment. Well, yeah, but you realize it's going to take you 30 years to pay it off. But the licensing effect, they still feel good because they made the minimum payment. And this is the example of personal finance app. So we said, what could you do? What would the ideal personal finance app be to really help people? So number one, whole unit framing. Talk about saving, talk about budget, talk about those impulse payments, put it all together so people can see everything. And remember that reduced cognitive processing ability and scarcity mindset, this makes it easier. Get them to make choices, right? Get them to say, I will not spend or I will not allow my credit card to increase above this amount, and if it does, then this will be the visible reminder to stop. And that's sort of a pre-commitment where you say, I'm going to say this now so that when I'm tempted later, I'm going to remember I said it so that then I'm going to abide by it. And you can even use this to help manage fraud, because if they get a notification every time they spend, that's actually a great fraud management practice. And we had a project with a large bank where people were not answering, weren't opening the fraud notifications because they didn't want to see it, and they were worried that the fraud notifications themselves were fraud. But could you imagine if you put it in an app, and instead of it being a tool for fraud, if this was a tool that they saw as a helpful hint that they were exceeding their budget? So this is an example of how you can use behavioral economics and understand how people think and behave to design better banking applications, better banking systems, better websites, right? These things can actually, and again, my view is if you did this, consumers would say, wow, that's great. Every single thing on here helps me as a banker. And yet, the consumers look at it and go, you guys are so cool. You are really helping me. I love you guys. And then they're going to go tell their friends. And this is not the traditional way that banks design apps. They don't design apps thinking from a behavioral science perspective. But if you do, you can see how you can come up with some really powerful creative ideas that help you and help your consumer at the same time. Let's think about intangible payments. So there's something called the pain of paying. Pain of paying. And there's a great example here. If you ever go on a cruise ship, you're often given two choices. You can either pay for every drink or you can buy the drink package, right? When you pay for every drink, every time you go up to the bar, you have to dig into your shorts and you have to pull out some money, and there's a physical reminder that you're spending money. And when you talk to those people about how happy they are, how much they enjoyed the cruise, they scored at a certain amount. The people who buy the drink package in advance, and by the way, I'm not advocating irresponsible behavior on cruise ships. That's not what I'm saying here. But the people who buy the drink package don't get that reminder. They show up, they show their bracelet, they get their drink, they're happy. The pain of paying occurs before they go on the cruise. And the cruise is pure enjoyment, right? But that can work in reverse as well. Imagine that you were able to buy things and not feel that pain of paying. Hey, I got a new video game. I don't have to pay for it, right? Between 2014 and 2019, cash transactions have declined significantly. And now, and this is Canadian data, but this data is similar everywhere. Electronic forms of payment are now over 80%. And the thing about electronic forms of payment is you don't feel it. You're not digging into your wallet and pulling out the bills and paying it. You're just like waving your card over something, it goes bang, and you go, hey, I got a video game. You don't feel that pain of paying. PayPal, right? The first quarter of 2021, their payments were up 50% over the previous year. People are doing a lot of intangible payments. And these intangible payments tend to make them forget that they're going to have to repay it. And it tends to make it a lot easier to do those impulse purchases because you don't feel that pain of paying. It's like walking up to the bar and showing your bracelet, right? It's, hey, I got a free drink. The problem is that can tend to encourage people to spend more on things they really shouldn't buy. And as a banker, I'm looking at it saying these people are getting more and more overextended financially because they're no longer having the pain of paying, of pulling that money out of their wallet. And so to me, that's dangerous. So that pain of paying has gone down. It defers the immediacy of payment and so reduces the pain. And then financial well-being deteriorates because they're overextending. And also, if you think about debt aversion, people really don't like having debt, but if they don't see it, it doesn't feel so bad. The more visible debt is, the more likely they are not to actually overextend. But these forms of payment become invisible. And so that really does become dangerous. What can we do? Actually, I can tell you a funny story about that, and this is a real experiment. So they gave people a hypothetical situation, said you have a credit card with $1,000 and a credit card with $500, okay? The credit card with $1,000 has a higher rate than the credit card with $500. I'm going to give you $600 right now. What are you going to do with it? So the right thing to do is to pay off all of the $500, which has the higher rate, and put $100 on the $1,000, right? But if you reverse it then and say, okay, the higher rate is the $1,000 or the lower rate is the $500, what do people do? Once again, they pay off the $500, even though the rate's higher on the $1,000. If you say to them, why did you do that? They say, well, I got rid of one credit card. Yeah, but you're paying more interest. And they go, yeah, I don't care. I only have one credit card with debt now, right? People behave that way. And if it makes them, right? So debt aversion also tends to be lower in categories where we spend less often. It's higher in frequent categories. People don't like putting groceries on a credit card, but they have no problem putting a cruise on a credit card because they don't see it and it's less frequent. Let's think about real estate prices. How am I doing for time? I want to make sure I have enough time left for questions. I don't have my phone on me. Someone, how much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Perfect. All right, so I'll zip through real estate. COVID's done some weird things, right? People are moving out of urban cores and they're moving into suburbs. And so property prices in cores started going down, they've started recovering. Rent started going down, they've started recovering. But these people moved out to these suburbs and suddenly it looked like there was a real estate boom. And this has happened globally. This has happened in Canada, this has happened in Mexico, this has happened in the US. Canada is actually one of the worst in the world for this. And people have something called extrapolative price expectations. When you see something go up, they assume it only ever goes up, right? It only goes one way. Well, we know that's not true. And people are borrowing more money and increasing their LTV, and they have worse LTI scores because suddenly they think real estate's a great investment because suddenly these suburban home prices are going up. And the real estate affordability has declined. If you look at, and I was looking at stats this morning before this, looking at stats in Mexico, comparing it to Canada, the home price appreciation has gone up and the affordability has gone down. And it's because of people moving money around as a result of migration. So this is the example of Canada and the US. The US prices have sort of recovered to where they were about a decade ago, and the Canadian prices are now 100% higher than the US prices. And people in Canada have lost their mind on real estate. And I talk to people and say, real estate's the best investment ever, it only ever goes up. And I say, yeah? What happened between '89 and 2001? Like, I don't know what happened. Well, real estate in Canada went down, and it was the worst possible investment. And it would surprise you to know that actually, if you put money in the S&P 500, and compared that to real estate, the S&P 500 beats it by a healthy margin. And when I tell people that, they say, no way. And I say, okay, you calculate your return on your home that you own, or you just bought an investment property, calculate your return. And they can't. They don't know how to do it. And if they do it, they forget taxes, transaction costs, maintenance costs, insurance. They forget all of these things. And when they actually do it and you show it to them, they go, holy crap. But once again, we're not computers. We weren't built to do exponential calculations in our head. And so many times we're making these decisions based on faulty assumptions. This is just some of the stats to show, for example, last year real estate in Canada went up almost 16%, in Mexico 6.6%. And so we're seeing this appreciation of real estate that, as a real estate lender would start to make me very nervous. Because if you look at the way the equilibrium for real estate, in theory, it should be roughly the same to rent a property as to buy a property. And if it becomes cheaper to rent, people are going to, do more renting. If it becomes more expensive, people are going to do more buying. There should be an equilibrium. The equilibrium has been gone for a decade. And so for me, that's very concerning. Implications. A lot of people are overconfident in their ability to calculate the returns on real estate. They don't calculate them properly. They don't consider alternatives. And with renting, right? People say, well, I got to have a house. Well, okay, does that mean you have to buy a house? Because you could take your down payment, put it in the stock market, rent, and if you could rent for way cheaper, why would you own a home? Now, I can understand that some people have some pleasure from owning it, but people don't do that calculation. And they don't say, okay, I could rent this for $1,000 less a month than it cost me to own it. Is owning it really worth $1,000 a month? And people don't do that. They don't think that way, because again, that's not the way our brains are organized. So to me, sooner or later, this has to come back in equilibrium. So as a real estate lender, this would concern me. What can we do? Encourage people to think about contrarian views. We all have something called confirmation bias, right? We have our favorite news network. We watch that network because it gives us opinions that are consistent with our opinions. It makes us feel smart. It makes us feel good. Change channel sometime, watch the channel that you don't like and listen to what they're saying. And I think that's one of the biggest flaws that's happened recently in society. We've lost the ability to disagree agreeably. People watch the channel that they like and the other people watch the channel they like, and then they get together and they both call each other idiots and say, you're completely wrong, how can you think that way? The problem is we're in bubbles, right? Encourage people to say, okay, you think real estate's just great? Why don't you stop hanging out on real estate websites that are put by real estate brokers to tell you what a great investment real estate is? And why don't you go on a website that says the opposite and then see if you can reconcile them? Think about house shopping, right? Fear of missing out. We're seeing in Canada this thing called just these crazy bidding wars. People are showing up and there's like 20, 30 offers on a home. And they're so afraid of missing out that they'll go $100,000 or $200,000 over offer. And then they get home and they go, crap, what did I just do? Right? I didn't want to miss out, but what did I just do? Well, pre-commit. Say, I will buy this house. So if I were to rent this house, it would cost me this much. Owning the house is worth $1,000 or more to a month for me. However, if I pay more than this amount of money, I'm going to come home and say, crap, what did I do? Right? So pre-commit to a limit, and if it's above that, then don't do it. There's also something called metacognition. Think about how you're thinking. Step back and say, how am I thinking? Am I being rational or am I being emotional? Because we are capable of rational thought, we often get sidetracked and sidelined by our emotional side. Try and be metacognitive when you're thinking. Try and say to yourself, am I thinking with my emotional side or am I thinking with my rational side? What does my rational side say? What does my emotional side say? Have that, the little devil and the little angel on your shoulder. Do that. It helps you make better decisions. And there's also something called the greater fool theory, where people will say, like GameStop, for example, right? Buying GameStop stock. Its economic value is below $15. And the last time I checked, it was trading for over $250. At one point, it got close to $500. And when you talk to a lot of people and say, why are you doing that? They say, oh, I know it's not worth $500, but I'm just going to hold on to it until it gets to $700, and someone is going to come along and pay me $700, and I'm going to make $200. That's called the greater fool theory. That says, yes, I'm being a fool, but someone is going to come along who's an even greater fool, and I'm going to take advantage of them. That's great, but it's a bit like musical chairs, because suddenly the music stops and the greater fool doesn't come along, and you're in a GameStop at $500 a share. Establish realistic expectation of appreciation. Say, what do I really know? Do I really know what GameStop is worth? Do I really understand their business model? Do I really understand the fundamental underlying valuation of GameStop before I go in and spend next month's rent on GameStop? And if you don't, it's probably best not to do that. And then think about alternative pessimistic scenarios, right? Be the devil's advocate. Be your own devil's advocate. Say, I think this is the right decision, but now I'm going to come up with 5 reasons why it's a bad decision. That helps decision making as well. So behavioral economics provides insights that work in many areas. Policymakers, lenders, consumers, and the reason why we think it's powerful is it is a real strong tool to help overall well-being. Remember again, I said financial well-being is more important than physical, job satisfaction, and relationship combined. It's an incredibly powerful tool to help society. And that's one of the things that makes me excited about it. I think probably at this point, I will stop for questions.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Pues ahora quiero invitar a Luis Eduardo Pérez Mata, presidente de ICM, que suba al escenario para interactuar con David en esta sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Bienvenido, Luis Eduardo.
Muchas gracias. First of all, David, thank you very much for your presentation. It's a very interesting topic. There are a few questions that I would like to translate for you. Well, they already are in English, so it would be easier for me. Okay. First, do you know if there is any institution in Latin America handling any research on behavioral economics?
There is, and I don't want to name names, but there are financial institutions here that are investing heavily on creating internal behavioral economics departments. Because again, I said, we know credit scoring models are not working as well as they used to, and we know that behavioral indicators do a very good job of augmenting those and supplementing them. And there are financial institutions that are hiring many behavioral economists internally so that they can use some of these insights to improve their business.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question is related with the debt collection side of the credit. So it says, can you give me an example, a specific example of behavioral economics applied to debt collections?
Sure. There's something called the goal gradient. The closer we get to a goal, the more effort we expend to achieve that goal. And if you think about it, I think it was Confucius said, the longest journey begins with the first step. The hardest thing is to just get started. Once you get people started, think about gamification. Think about how that can help you exercise. If you turn debt repayment and collections, don't make it seem like this is a 5-year repayment period. Make it seem like they're making progress. Reinforce that progress. Make it a bit of a game, right? Give them non-monetary rewards to say, hey, you've now made 5 payments in a row. If you make your 6th payment, you'll have completed a string of 6. And it sounds cheesy, it sounds infantile, but if it can get people to work hard to close the circles on their watch, that's a game. And yet people will expend effort and energy to do it. And so that, that's an example. Make it easy. Don't make it seem like a big, long, hard task, right? Remember scarcity mindset. Make it fun. Give them rewards, right? There's a great example of a bank that tried to encourage people to save. And the way they did it is they gave them a gold coin, and they would scratch off every week that they made a deposit to their account. And the people who they gave monetary compensation to other people and said, if you do this, we're going to pay you money. Well, strangely enough, the people who they just gave this little coin to that they ticked off every time they made a payment saved more than the people who they paid money to.
Okay. Well, David, once again, thank you very much for your presentation and for being part of Crevolution.
Thank
you very much. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.